Hello everyone, Punchy here. I'd like to talk to you today about recently released indie horror game Heartworm, which I finished recently and I have some thoughts on. Just for immediate disclosure, I was given a review key of this game, but I wasn't obligated to produce this video. I'm just kinda here because as a classic survival horror guy, people will ask me what I think of any new release of this type, so here we go. In Heartworm, you take on the role of Sam, a young woman who, unable to get over the death of her grandfather, pursues an internet forum lead to a place where it is said one can commune with the dead. And then all sorts of weird stuff starts happening. The game is a staunchly traditional survival horror game with fixed camera angles and indeed defaults to tank controls. Very much in the vein of a Resident Evil or Silent Hill, those appear to be the primary points of inspiration. And indeed, pretty much everything you would expect from that type of game is represented here. Limited resources and limited inventory space. Exploration of environments broken up through puzzles. Item boxes that magically transport your items across the world. All in all, a clear love letter to the classic survival horror games of old, and since all the elements would seem to check out, and I'm a classic survival horror guy, this is the sort of thing I would be all over. So let me explain why I'm not. Yep, despite this being the kind of game I am uniquely poised to enjoy, I really came away pretty numb on my time with Heartworm. If my description of what the game is like sounded like a pretty generic bullet point list of features, that's kind of because that's all the game is, really. It's a perfectly functional, bare-bones recreations of the mechanics of classic survival horror games, but it has no real spice of its own, and it's not as mechanically intricate or complex as any of the games it's aping, which leaves the game without much of a strong identity or focus of its own. And that's a shame, because I do think there is clear love in the production. It's not a cynically made game. The high point by far are the environments, which are lovingly rendered and look really good. If all you want in a game is to look at some nice PS1 polygonal style environments, then Heartworm will wet your whistle perfectly fine. In particular, I'm very fond of the effect where from a distance the environments look slightly out of focus and a bit pre-rendered, but when you aim the camera snaps behind your shoulder and you can see environments with a lot of clarity. It keeps the game both readable from the fixed camera angles, and also you can see a lot of things in greater detail. It's very good, it's a striking effect, I do quite like it. I wish the game was built around it. I think this is a case of me misunderstanding the game's priorities somewhat, but when I noticed that you could change the camera perspective like this, I thought in some way that it would factor into problem solving, but it just doesn't. And indeed, it can't, because the game actually has the option to let you aim via normal tank control style camera instead, rather than the over-the-shoulder camera, so it couldn't be built around mixed perspective. But it does feel like something of a missed opportunity to me, especially when Sorry We're Closed, an indie game from last year, used this effect so well itself. But okay, so I'm stupid, but this type of missed potential is all over Heartworm. For instance, a mechanic the game introduces within the first area and tutorializes is the ability to illuminate the environment using your camera flash. This effect also looks quite good. But it's never really used for problem solving, and there's no enemies in these early environments, and after the first area, the mechanic basically completely disappears from the game. And that's kind of the problem with Heartworm in a nutshell. Every time I think it's grasping for some sort of unique identity, it finds a way to just sort of fumble the ball. For another example, the only weapon you have in this game is your camera, which is not a gun, so you think there would be something different about it. Sadly, no, not really. The camera functions like a gun, and it doesn't behave any differently from one in any standard survival horror game. The fact the main weapon is a camera might put you in mind of Fatal Frame, which have unique combat systems based around framing your shot, distance to the enemy, various film types. None of this is present in Heartworm. You just point the camera in their direction and you shoot it. Nothing else. It's perfectly functional combat, but it's not very engaging. Early on in the game, you're also able to pick up a camera modification that upgrades the camera so it can fire multiple rounds in one shot, and the game even tutorializes you on the removal of these camera upgrades, which implies that you can equip different ones, again, like the system in Fatal Frame. There isn't more than one upgrade though, so why does it bother introducing this? This is an example of something I'm pretty sure got cut during development, because why would it be there otherwise? But as a result, you have effectively one weapon and one ammo type, and that means there's not a lot of items to manage in this survival horror game where one of the principal limitations is a limited inventory. This is an example of how the limited scope has a knock-on effect with the rest of the game. Limited inventories in survival horror games are meant to force interesting decisions on the player. You can't carry multiple types of weaponry and your entire ammunition stash with you at the same time, while also carrying keys and various healing items with you. In Heartworm, you have one weapon and one ammo type that stacks infinitely. There is never ever a decision to be made about what to take with you. You're going to take your camera, you're going to take all the ammo you have on you, the rest of the slots are just free to fill up with health kits, and you would not believe how many medkits I had at the end of this game. It is a very, very easy game, to point of being unengaging, frankly. It being easy isn't necessarily a problem by itself, but the fact I'm not making any decisions while I'm doing this makes my brain sort of tune out. And there only tends to be 1 or 2 key items per area anyway, so there's no real risk to having inventory management be a problem that even comes up. And even if it did, I suspect it wouldn't really matter anyway, because Heartworm's maps aren't really conducive to the type of route planning that classic Resident Evil is good at. Environments in Heartworm are weirdly massive, but not very dense. You spend a lot of time walking through empty space to get to points of interest, and this drags out the game for much longer than I think it actually has content. And environments also tend to be very wide, meaning it's pretty trivial to circumvent most enemies by just sort of running around them. This is why classic survival horror games like Resident Evil mostly take place in cramped corridors, because it's not meant to be easy to bypass all of the enemies. This is what makes fight or flight in those games an interesting choice, because if you try to flee and fail, you'll take damage. Clearing out frequently traversed hallways consumes ammo. It's a decision. But not only are enemies trivial to bypass in Heartworm, they frequently respawn anyway. So there's basically no point to engaging with standard enemies for the most part. Now, none of this is broken. Heartworm isn't a dire video game, I just think it's sort of an unimaginative one. It wanted to be a classic survival horror game, but didn't really have any ideas of how to put its own stamp on that, so they just kinda made one that's functional. And it is very functional, I will give it that. It did not break on me or behave unexpectedly, but I can't say it did a single thing I would define as particularly interesting. And yeah, I found that disappointing given the effusive praise this game has been receiving from my horror content creator peers. I don't get it. I kind of feel like there's an instinctive desire to be nice because it's an indie game made by a team of like 6 people or something. And for whatever it's worth, I'm not trying to tear them down or start a fight or anything. The game is fine. It doesn't offend me or anything. But I find myself unable to join in the enthusiasm on this one, so I'm going to be a hater instead. So all in all, the mechanics are pretty stock and quite weak even at that, but the game could lean on its narrative. Like I've said, the artistic direction of the game is easily its strongest point. These are very good looking environments, and also the game has quite good music. However, I wouldn't say a lot really happens in Heartworm's narrative. It's just sort of a tone piece about grief and loss as the main character exposits their emotions to the camera as they walk through environments related to their life. That, once again, isn't a problem in of itself, a thing I find myself saying a lot about Heartworm, because a lot of what it isn't the problem in of itself, it's what it doesn't have. I understand what it's going for, but I don't really connect with the voice. The emotions aren't really making it onto the page, and that is, as to put too much of myself on the table, someone who does empathize with the subject matter. The protagonist's inner narration is melodramatic to point of coming across almost funny at times. Nothing nice ever seems to happen to her or anyone who lived near her. The line between emotional earnestness and a bit corny is admittedly a thin one, but for me it landed distinctly on the side of Maze. And even the tone I found a little hard to dial into, because while the first 2 areas are effectively cloying and dark and a bit dingy, the second major area is this honestly quite nice wilderness space. It's brightly lit, it's pleasingly colored, this is just a nice environment. I found this place actually quite relaxing. I think the game wants it to feel melancholic, but I just thought it was pleasant. Still very nice to look at least, although unfortunately there's not that much to do in these environments because puzzles are all pretty stock. It runs the gamut of fairly typical survival horror stock puzzles, use weird shaped key on thing that doesn't look like a keyhole, word-based puzzles in poems, nothing that really got me thinking or made me feel clever, and one puzzle at the end is one of those obnoxious sliding puzzles, and this one I'm freely going to be mean about. The year is 2025. I would like to never do one of these ever again for as long as I live. I've been playing games for over 30 years now. We've got to stop putting these in games. They are boring, they are gameplay substitute. If I wanted to do something like this, I would buy a puzzle book from the supermarket. Please stop doing this. Unless your game is in some way about these types of very rudimentary logic puzzles, please stop putting them in completely unrelated action games. Same goes for Towers of Hanoi and Lights Out, by the way. There's none of those in this game, but just by a similar token. You have the entire scripting power of a fucking game engine at your hands, and you made a sliding block puzzle. Why? Be more creative, for God's sake. You're putting me to sleep here. This all unfortunately leaves Heartworm as a game I would struggle to recommend for anything other than its aesthetic sensibility, because it just doesn't do anything particularly interesting. Even if you're determined to play an indie horror game specifically, we've had much more interesting offers over the last 3 years. Play Sorry We're Closed if you want to see an interesting reinterpretation of classic survival horror mechanics with mixed camera perspectives. Play Conscript if you want to see survival horror flow reimagined in an isometric style along with a crushingly depressing, suffocating narrative. Play Crow Country if you want to see PS1-styled survival horror with interesting ideas about what to do with the camera. Play Alyssa if you want to play a fairly traditionally styled classic fixed camera angle survival horror game, but with a high emphasis on combat and a lot of enemy variety backing up that combat. If you want tight, condensed Resident Evil-style decision-making, consider Nightmare of Decay or Dead Beacon. If you've played all of those and are absolutely desperate for a new polygonal horror fix, then Heartworm will tide you over, I suppose. But that's kind of all it will do. And that's a bit disappointing.